Welcome back to another edition of the 6-5 Podcast, weekly edition, episode number 102. Pat, we're past the 100 mark. I don't even know if we need to call this out anymore. Let's just say we are super committed and we have hit the benchmark. Now it's all about 100 to a million. I don't know, buddy. But it's Friday. It's Friday morning. We're on schedule this week. Can't promise it'll be that way for the rest of this year because we are heading into the holidays. We are heading into some travel. But we love these Friday mornings, and we love weeks when there's lots of big news in the tech space. And this week, there was plenty, Pat. Probably highlight events, NVIDIA GTC, AMD had some big news. And we're going to talk about a whole bunch of other news that broke this week. But first of all, Pat Moorhead, good morning. How are you, my friend? Excited to be back.
Daniel, it's my favorite part of the week, which is Friday. Do most of our potting, and it's kind of free flow potting. Right? We're not having a guest, which I do love our guests. Don't get me wrong, but I do like to pod with my bestie. So I'm just, I'm mixing it up this week with a new background, new room in the condo down here. This might possibly be my son's room. Possibly, I don't know. You can see the Alienware going on. Just possibly. His gaming.
Yeah, I like his room. I like his collection of cool shoes, Jordans, and he's got the ultimate gamer setup. Everybody needs to know Mr. Pico Moorhead. So he also has an affinity for fast cars, like someone else I know, which is super fun. By the way, it is November 12th, and I would like to take a moment to do a little shout out. It is Miss Paula Moorhead's birthday. Am I correct? It's the wife's birthday today.
So nice.
And she's what, 33? I believe. And then my beautiful middle daughter, Avery, is turning 16 today. And no, don't ask. I'm not buying her a car. She's one of those like Z kids. She doesn't even really want to drive, which is super weird to me. But we're having that conversation because it's getting to a point where it's actually more inconvenient to me than to her that she doesn't want to do that because I'm not quite comfortable having her riding around in Ubers yet. But Pat, big week, excited. Let's just quickly knock out the disclaimers. Our show is for information and entertainment purposes only. And while we will be talking about publicly traded companies on this show, please do not take anything we say as investment advice. And of course, as a reminder for everybody out there, the 6-5, it was really all about 6 topics, 5 minutes each. We've sort of blown that, but you will get 6 topics. They are handpicked. And our whole concept here is less news, more analysis, getting in between the lines, what you really need to know about the week's most interesting stories across tech. And this week we'll have AMD, NVIDIA, Luminar, Mitel-RingCentral, Microsoft, Intel, and Qualcomm as our key topics. But who knows where we may end up between now and the end of the show. But Pat, rock and roll. You ready to, what do you always like to say? Are you ready to light this candle, Daniel?
Something like that, something cheesy and Gen X-y. So,
all right, well, light this candle. First topic is AMD. Wow, what a week. What a week, Pat. And I just want to say on Friday, you know this because over the weekend I was pitching back and forth with you a market watch piece I was working on. And I said, who are going to be the next 3 mega cap companies, which are companies with valuations over $200 billion. On Friday, AMD closed at somewhere around 150. On Monday, the announcement that you're about to talk about came out and their market cap jumped to 180. And I felt like I had absolutely nailed the premonition. The only problem was the piece came out after the news, despite the fact that I wrote it first. But I'm telling you here, Pat, as my witness, you knew I was writing that piece before that news broke.
I did. I vouch for you. You may have asked me a question about it. That's how I know. No, you were spot on. You were spot on. So what on earth drove the stock up to a closing of 154.45? Or actually it opened. It was interesting. I'm going to jump right to the Meta announcement, which Meta/Facebook said it was using Epic. Which, by the way, my comment was, well, that's great, but it's really not as big a news as you might have thought, and maybe that's why the stock went from 154 down to 140. But the news that came out was that AMD brought out a new EPYC, 3rd generation AMD EPYC with AMD 3D V-Cache. Wow, that's just some awesome acronyms there. So first off, HPC is an important market. It's not just for universities or national projects, although AMD did win some big ones with this chip, but also their accelerator, the MI2, the Instinct. And it's also for things like banks. It's for drug discovery. It's for high frequency trading. So high performance computing has actually turned into high performance computing, not just the national labs. So this new chip, so what the heck is a 3D V-cache? Well, what AMD did is AMD's calling it a 3D package, which I'm going to give them credit for. I thought it was more of a 2.5D, but if they're going to call it 3D, I guess it's 3D. But essentially, they've put a giant piece of cache to accelerate it. And their claims are that it increases performance on certain HPC workloads up to 40 to 50%, which is pretty incredible. And I see now why they're winning many of these national labs. So, I mean, they've tripled the amount of L3 cache. You could put, there's 800 megabits of cache per socket, which is completely bonkers. So whether it's element analysis, structural analysis, computational fluid dynamics, EDA, this thing is absolutely rocking. AMD also brought out some partners: Altair, Ansys, Cadence, Siemens, and Synopsys. The MI200, it's interesting with AMD, they keep making these huge announcements on the GPU side. They're getting a little bit of traction, but not a lot. NVIDIA is winning most of that, but they brought out a new MI200, Instinct MI200, which, by the way, on paper, on a floating point basis, does blow away the NVIDIA A100. Now, GPU hardware has never been AMD's challenge. It's really been the software. With CUDA as locked in as it is, it's harder for AMD to drive business, let's say, than NVIDIA. But I'm optimistic here in what they can mean. The market does want more competition. AMD did win multiple lab wins over NVIDIA with its GPUs. So I think it's definitely looking up for the data center side of the GPU house.
Yeah, Pat, and it was a big week overall. I sort of alluded to the Facebook news. I mean, it's interesting with Facebook is because the company is almost an untouchable in terms of everybody's disdain for some of Zuckerberg's antics and the company's treatment of its users. But at the same time, its users are staying steady and in fact growing. The stock price is up more than Amazon for the year. And the metaverse, they've seemed to somehow, at least in early days, taken ownership, because even Microsoft is going to partner with Meta. I can't call it Meta though.
So
I'm just going to call it Facebook. Because I'm not going to actually universally accept metaverse as our future term, and we'll come back to that. So that was a really big win, a big announcement for the company. The other one that I just wanted to touch on around AMD was the announcements rise with SAP and AMD becoming a deeper, more integrated partner. And this really is a shout to Lisa Su and her team's successful capturing of more substantial market share for data center compute with EPYC. As the company has usurped its longer term goal of 10%. And I also point out that Intel still has a huge amount of market share. So everybody that's calling their demise early, they're still very, very, very important in this space. But having said that, SAP has come to recognize that it needs to make it easy for SAP users that are migrating and upgrading to S4 and to new technologies on SAP to be able to do it with AMD in the most seamless way possible. So for the longest time, there's been an extraordinarily deep partnership with Intel and SAP, and it was seemingly untouchable. But this move and the fact that SAP not only is offering it, but Rise with SAP, which is their program that's all about simplifying and bundling the delivery of SAP in the cloud is going to standardize more capabilities around AMD. It was a really good reflection. It shows a really positive momentum. All right, we were on that one a little bit longer than we intended, but good, kudos AMD. Pat, this week's big event was all about NVIDIA. GTC, even Twitter gets a little hashtag with a custom leather jacket. When we do a 6.5 summit, I want a little, one of our little heads or something to be next to our names. I mean, then we know we're doing it right. But listen, there was like 20 plus announcements. It was huge. So the way I think we could break this down, Pat, is maybe I talk about one thing, you talk about one thing that kind of stood out to you, and then we have another topic later that'll indirectly talk a little bit more about what's going on. So my focus kind of bounces off the last topic of Meta and Facebook and Metaverse. And that, in case you weren't aware, for some time now, NVIDIA's had a technology called Omniverse. And Omniverse has been all about creating more integration between our digital and physical universes through things like gaming, collaboration, simulation. And this particular GTC, the company further inundated its role and its commitment to playing in the verse. And the reason I'm going to take the word out in front of it is because clearly Jensen and NVIDIA is in dispute that Meta or Metaverse is going to be the term of the future. The company believes it will be Omniverse. It feels a little bit, Pat, like DPU versus IPU versus XPU, which I'll just say PU. Listen, we're going to get there. But what NVIDIA is doing, and what I really came out and said, is first of all, they had two really big announcements. One was around synthetic data with its Omniverse Replicator synthetic data generation engine for training AIs. Whoo, take a breath there. But what's going on there is that effectively when you're in this Omniverse, Metaverse, when you're in simulation, digital twin, you're creating all this data. And you need to be able to build models that can take that data, which is called synthetic data that's being created in a digital twin or a parallel universe, as I like to call it, and concurrently mesh it with the data of our physical universe and be able to use it for things like simulating test drives of vehicles. When you're going into the future of fully autonomous vehicles, you can create millions of simulations that create useful data that would be practical in the real world, but you need to have a way to be able to utilize that data, optimize it.
Daniel, did you say digital twin?
Digital twin.
Oh, okay. I got you.
Ah, there's a digital twin. That's the cover of my Forbes piece about it, in fact. And so the best two examples of how that's going to end up working is going to be really around autonomous vehicle and robots. I think those are the two early utilizations of it. But really, this is all about the evolution of AI. It's having physical and virtual environments and all that data used concurrently to create the most valuable models, frameworks to develop future environments, which could and possibly will include something like Metaverse from Facebook or Meta or Microsoft's Teams on workplace spaces, whatever. You get.
I know what you're saying.
The second is your avatar is waiting, is what I called that little section, but is NVIDIA Omniverse avatar. And the company's basically built a platform for generating interactive AI avatars. And this is what we saw Jensen show off. But, in order for us to have the Omniverse or Metaverse or whatever the heck we end up wanting to call it, we're going to need to be able to create intelligent versions of ourselves and others. So, Jensen showed himself, but the company, like it did with Inference and Jarvis and Merlin and these frameworks, it did something similar here with its real world use cases, which this is what NVIDIA is so good at, by the way, is creating real world use cases where they're less about being a hardware company and more about being a solutions or software company. And they came up with Project Takiko and Project Maxine. Takiko was all about showing examples of how customer support could be used, how an avatar could basically be generated and created in this meta omni world to create interactive customer service. They showed an example in a restaurant. They showed an example with what was the other one they showed? I had a note about that. I'm just trying to find it. A conversation with like a professor or someone about climate change. I mean, you could actually have an interactive conversation with it. The other one was Maxine, Pat, and this is a really interesting and actual practical version in this hybrid future of work. Is they put two people working in noisy environments across the world, speaking different languages, and how using the avatar technology and Omniverse, they could instantly streamline the language, take all the background noise out. So it's like you're having a quiet, private conversation with seamless language translation in this omniverse. So that, to me, that's a really useful, practical example of bringing the world closer together. Which is why I've sort of said, I think NVIDIA may end up, I'm blurring for some reason, NVIDIA may end up being more important to the future of whatever these digital and physical world creations are than Facebook, Meta, but not necessarily will they get the credit for it. But that's why, Pat, we are here. So there's one other thing I know you and I'm going to kick this one to you, but our friends at Cloudera and NVIDIA announced a really interesting partnership as well.
Yeah, you want to talk about that?
I did. I was, I could punt it to you, or you want me to do it?
Oh, well, you wrote the article on Cloudera. Why don't you do it?
Absolutely. So, the Cloudera machine learning, and basically NVIDIA offered what's called Rapids Edition Machine Learning Runtime. Another mouthful, but it's really all about rapid Docker images. It's about helping data scientists get up and running on GPUs with a single click of a button. And to me, this is one of those big moments where a company like Cloudera, partnering with a company like NVIDIA, to be able to streamline and add capabilities for democratizing data science. And by the way, Pat, this is a really important topic because we have better and better compute technology with GPUs, but the ability for enterprises to utilize it comes down to software, comes down to data management and data science. And so what I've really been impressed with is the Cloudera data platform, the company, and the way it's been basically partnering successfully around the internet, and basically removing barriers that basically enable data scientists to adopt GPUs for workloads that are more than just deep learning. So overall, Pat, it was a announcement within an announcement within a number of announcements. But you and I, we track Cloudera very closely, and as far as I see it, it's a great alignment for the company.
Yeah, totally. One thing I'm going to hit on NVIDIA's auto announcement. So a little bit of background. NVIDIA has about a $600 million annual business in automotive. Hasn't moved up extraordinarily over the past couple of years, but once we start, I believe once we start seeing more L2 plus, L3, and even L4, it'll explode. I'd love to get a backlog number from them, like we get from Qualcomm, but I have not been successful in that. But they have a tremendous amount of logos, and you can catch those logos in my Forbes article. But one thing I want to hit on is what they actually did announce at the show. So first off is they brought out a new stack called Drive Concierge, and they also brought out Drive Chauffeur. And you can imagine what those are. Should be pretty easy to figure out. So with Concierge, NVIDIA creates an omniverse avatar for you to communicate with and interact with driving. You have an emoji, like a 3D emoji-like figure. It sees, it speaks, you have conversations back and forth. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like it's the Jensen emoji. It's more kind of like a robotic, but it can essentially help you do all these on-demand things like getting a reservation, easy stuff like, show me, where I can go, turn off the radio or do something like that. And then the next thing they brought in was Chauffeur, and Chauffeur is exactly what you think it might be. It's AI-assisted driving platform, and it's built for highway and urban traffic environments. Everything you would expect from NVIDIA. Does NVIDIA have too many names, too many brand names? Probably, but Chauffeur and Concierge are pretty easy for people to understand. Now, this software sits right on top of a platform called Hyperion 8. And Hyperion 8 is a platform for L3 and up to L4. You can have one or two Orans, which is the name of their SoC. You can have DriveWorks comes along with that, Drive AV software, and a bunch of tools that allow OEMs to optimize for it. Now, Hyperion 8 went GA, and part of Hyperion 8 was a full set of sensors. And what we learned at the show was that the LiDAR sensor of choice, the only LiDAR that showed up on the slide, was from a company called Luminar. And their stock price just absolutely took off. I think it went up 20% based on that announcement. And I thought it was a good way for Luminar to show off their wares, in that they're part of, I guess arguably one of the most sophisticated driving platforms out there. The other thing is, I think it put you don't need LiDAR to bed. Okay. There's a lot of theories out there, and even Elon Musk thinks he doesn't need LiDAR, but he's 3 years late in getting out his fully autonomous software stack. So Luminar also had earnings that they announced yesterday. And I think the highlight there, in addition to its further productization of all its stacks out there, was an 89% increase in revenue. And, for a growing startup like this, a public startup, I think it was a pretty awesome feat.
Yeah, so we've kind of just pivoted from topic 2 to 3, which was Luminar. And Pat, yeah, you pointed out the growth. You and I had the chance during F1 to actually meet with Austin Russell, and I've had a chance at IAA over in Germany. And I continue to be impressed by this company. It's revenue-wise, it's still very early days, but the company has increasingly been selected to really take the LiDAR and long-range LiDAR into the next generation. Then as we move from L2 plus, which is a lot of what we still end up talking about, to L4, long-range LiDAR is going to be a critical element and component. Traditional sensors and vision cannot accomplish the same thing. And I had the chance when I was at IAA in Germany to actually witness this hands-on, seeing, a child running out from a truck, and that the LiDAR was able to identify and stop a vehicle where traditional L2 plus driver assistant technology is not capable of doing so. This particular win here, look, on time, not on time, that's a discussion we can have with whether or not NVIDIA is getting there. But everybody's goal is to get to L4, is to get to fully autonomous, safe, fully autonomous driver in and out of the loop, to be able to enable next generation of smart cities, connected environments. And so NVIDIA is putting a real timestamp on it, though. So to their credit, they're saying in 2024, they're going to be able to provide the technology to OEMs that is going to enable fully autonomous vehicles to be commercially sold on the road. Speaking of on the road, Pat, that's the name of our, when we take our podcast to our client events, in case anybody is looking for, that. Anyway, but, for Luminar, it's a great validation. You're talking about a company like NVIDIA that's been paramount to the development of Tesla software, and that has worked very closely with Tesla over the years. You're looking at a company that has design wins for a vast majority of major OEMs, and a company that's expected to be playing a very significant role. Luminar's won companies like Volvo. They've won companies like Polaris, which has an upcoming de-SPACing for their vehicle business, which is super interesting. And, Austin Russell is a really compelling, really passionate guy. So I'm interested in seeing how this comes out to the next level, but it's never a bad thing as you're a rising company to be endorsed and put in as the primary design win, or in a new product like Luminar was by NVIDIA. So Pat, let's rock on. You okay with that?
Yeah, I think I'm okay with that. No,
did we get that one? Did I get it? Did I cover it?
You nailed it.
All right. So, In other interesting news, Pat and you and I both were tracking this, but this week, RingCentral and Mitel worked together to basically create a new exclusive UCaaS partnership called MVP. And MVP will integrate with Mitel's CloudLink technology and provide Mitel's customer base of almost 35 million with a more simple path to migrate to the cloud or cloud phone system. So it's a big move for both RingCentral. Because of course the company wants to capture a bigger part of market share for UCaaS, and UCaaS is, still heavily on-prem, and concurrently Mitel, which at this point still is limited to prem-based private cloud type deployments, is looking to take advantage of the market and desire for people to put phone systems in the public cloud. So the way this partnership works is that RingCentral is going to pay $650 million to Mitel, and they're going to acquire some intellectual property and patents and rights to cover network and call management, security, and infrastructure. From the Mitel side, the company's going to basically spin around and invest $200 million in equity back into RingCentral. And so, this is basically going to come out in the first half of 22, but I think this is going to be a big impact and was a very necessary move at this current juncture for Mitel. As well as a good move for RingCentral. Because like I said, you have this shifting demand, a lot like other cloud workloads, Pat, you and I have talked about, where the world thinks everything is in the public cloud, but it's not. RingCentral has grown exponentially, had some very, very big success around being simple to deploy cloud-based, IP phone systems. But you've got so many customers that still want to do this on-prem, and they have not had an answer for this. So now they're going to have an answer for this. So credit to now chairman of the board, Mary McDowell. She's been elevated to chairman in the company now as a new CEO, Tarun Lumba. This was a timely move. It's going to be important long term. I think it's good for both companies, and I think it solidifies both of their growth paths going forward. I've long said I think Mitel needs to get to the cloud, needs to address that particular part of the market, and now they have.
Yeah. So, Daniel, great analysis. I'm going to go to the one slide that's kind of the before and the after. So here's where we are today. And then I'm going to flip over here and you can see on the far right what happens to UCaaS. Okay. It goes from, Mitel hosted to RingCentral hosted. Okay. And I think this was the slide that kind of, told everything for me. And quite frankly, this reminds me very much of what we have with HPE, we have with Dell, and we have with Lenovo that do not have their own public clouds. The current on-prem business is a lot bigger than the cloud business, and that's true for UCaaS, and that's also true for CCaaS. But it's clearly going to the cloud. Now, you've got cloud only, like an 8x8 and, a Zoom, right, as an example. Interestingly enough, you have Zoom, who I know is eyeballing on-prem solutions because there are certain types of customers that require on-prem solutions. But when I think of Lenovo, when I think of Dell and HPE, Mitel is going to have to find a way to monetize the public cloud. And I think one argument for at least UCaaS might be, okay, well, they just did a deal with RingCentral. So now RingCentral is a public company. Mitel is a private company. I'm going to be interested to see some of the longer term financial deal that happened with that. Because, is Mitel going to get, X amount of dollars when it brings, in a new customer and brings it over to RingCentral? I know there's going to be an exchange of money on this deal that you talked about, but my goal is to better understand the go forward model of Mitel. But it's going to look a lot like what we have with HPE, Dell, and Lenovo. Not like IBM and Oracle, who have private and public clouds, but those three companies.
Absolutely. So, Pat, let's keep moving. We're doing okay today. Doing
Yeah.
okay. Normally it's like the 620, it's like the 3 hour long pod, but we're hitting the topics. We're keeping things moving. And I like that. But some announcements this week, Pat, from Windows, Microsoft 11 SE, and a new Surface Laptop SE. You've been all over this one.
Yeah. So a little background, Chrome OS and Chromebooks are hot, at least in North America, in, I would say, K through 12, probably more like K through 8. Even though my kids didn't have Chromebooks, they had Windows machines. A lot of them have Chromebooks, and I think we also saw that with COVID, some kids unfortunately didn't have any compute devices, and Chromebooks basically flew off the shelves. Chrome OS has 10% market share. Windows has 82% market share. And Microsoft has been trying to stem the flow for a few years. And in my opinion, Microsoft missed two things. First of all, having the right platform. Windows is arguably a more robust platform than Chrome, although there's a lot of people who will debate that. You can run Android apps if you want on Chrome OS, but Chrome OS is really about the browser and everything you do in the browser. And if you're doing everything in the browser, typically you can hit a low cost point because you don't nearly need the horsepower to be able to hit that. But ironically, it was the degree of simplicity or the lack of simplicity that very few people talk about that I believe is hurting Microsoft in this space. We've had $249 Chromebooks come out, low-end Windows notebooks, but it didn't seem to stem the flow. So not only did the Surface team bring out a new device called the Surface Laptop SE at $249 for K through 8, they also brought out a more simplified Intune and a more simplified Teams for education. I haven't had a chance to play with the device, Daniel. I haven't had a chance to play with the software yet. I like the aspiration, but if this isn't simpler, it just isn't going to make a difference. I am hopeful because typically with Microsoft, they'll chip away at it. My gosh. Microsoft had the first Windows tablet back in 1991. I worked for the company that brought that out. We had failure after failure in tablets. Apple came along, and then the Surface Pro just kicked everybody's butt out there. So I'm hopeful. I need to use the device, and I need to use the software.
Yeah, I think it's all about hitting a market. I mean, this is an area where Chrome and Google have done just extraordinarily well. But addressing that market, we all know what happened with remote learning. We all know also what happens with affinity. You get the right devices in hands when they're younger, and you build an affinity if it's good for those devices as they get older. All of our kids that have grown up, and at least here in the United States, Apple has the dominant majority of the smartphones, and these kids are absolutely Apple crazy. Hard to even convince them to consider anything else. They're mostly using Chromebooks, lower end Chromebooks, and I'll tell you what, there is very little affinity for these devices. In fact, the kids will tell you, and that's a combination of the software and the hardware. Most of them are very locked down. They're kind of comparatively to the nicer Surface or the nicer HP devices, they're pretty cheap. They're plasticky. Their batteries aren't particularly impressive. But it was all about getting them down to a certain price point. So that's not the manufacturing. That's the spec. But Surface is creating what's looking like a more premium product, a little nicer on the eye. But to your point, it's going to have to be very easy to use, which is what has been managed with Chrome and Chromebooks so far. Lightweight, easy to use, very little you can do with the software, pretty hard to break. But these devices look good, Pat, and I've said this for a long time. The Surface line, they make very, very nice machines. I'm an everyday user of their products, and I think this is one, I think you hit it very well. Time will tell us if this was a winner. but the $249 starting price point is, at least in some communities of a little bit greater resources, should be an achievable price point. Certainly something you can't meet with Apple. So,
what an interesting point. What an interesting time to bring a low-end device in as well, right?
Yeah, because there's so many chips around to make them.
No, I know, a supply chain crisis. So, this thing has, is going to use the same, well, not the same exact USB controller, but those USB controllers and PMICs that everybody is fighting for at a $249 price point with a Microsoft tag on it. One thing I forgot to add on the simplicity part is where Microsoft did change the way that it operated is it essentially these education editions were stripped down to the core of the operating system, right? Either you could only run applications out of the App Store, out of a special App Store, or there was just something fundamentally wrong with it, right? The only limitation I can find that I've looked into this could actually simplify it, which is you can only window on the left and on the right. Okay. And some people are like, oh my gosh, it's so limiting. And I'm thinking, wow, that kind of seems simple for my first grader. Well, my first grader that I had like 27 years ago, but it seems like a really good thing. But I did want to add that I've got to try this out. I want to try the Intune, right? I manage my own IT at my small little 30 resource company. And I picked Google, right? I picked Google 10 years ago because it was simple, right? I compared the two. I'm like, I don't even understand what Microsoft is talking about on this console. And I sat on my kid's school board on the tech council, and they were just like, we have a hard time figuring this out, but we only want one platform K through 12. So we're picking Windows, but they had to hire an IT person. So I wanted to add that on. My apologies. I did a boomerang.
Absolutely. You boomeranged away, and that's all good, especially because we aren't crazy over on time right now, but we are at the end here, Pat. And so, an interesting piece of news broke this week, and I had the chance to talk to Mr. Dylan Martin, who does a nice job over at CRN diving into the semiconductor space. And he reached out to me about a recent memo that Intel basically put out, reorganizing their strategic accounts underneath Michelle Johnston Holthouse. And she came out with a memo effectively saying these are going to be the companies that are going to be led and focused on by our strategic accounts team. And it was basically business as usual. It was Dell, it was HP, Lenovo, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and then the last one though was Qualcomm. And so I was pinged about this because really right now those two companies have had contentious moments in the mobile handset space, which Qualcomm over time eventually and expectedly emerged based on its history as Apple moved to acquire Intel's 5G mobile handset technology IP and is working towards building its own, we think. But now, after new announcements that came out not so long ago by Pat Gelsinger, all about the Foundry service and about a strategic partnership. So now, what used to be maybe competitors or battle in the ring companies fighting for positions in emerging and current markets, Qualcomm and Intel look more likely to be working together. And this announcement sort of, in my mind, reiterated just how much Intel sees Qualcomm as strategic. And so I was trying to dig into, well, what is it that they're seeing as strategic? And, Pat, and I think you could have a little fun with this, but a couple of things came to mind because it's not so much that you wouldn't expect Intel to work with Qualcomm. It's just at this level of naming them as 7 key accounts when you know why the other 6 are, and Qualcomm's clearly not large today. Now you saw Qualcomm's, 70+% EPS growth and humongous revenue growth in the last quarter on a tear. 5G's on a tear, but you also know Qualcomm bought a company called Nuvia not that long ago. Pat, you were an advisor. And that particular acquisition and the fact that Qualcomm has been closely working with ARM, developing always connected PCs that are now being deployed by the likes of Lenovo, Samsung, and others are, Microsoft using Qualcomm's Windows on ARM. You'd say that could be one angle, is providing chips. But the other angle, of course, is foundry service. And there was an announcement that came out from Pat Gelsinger, and later another announcement that came out from Qualcomm. Now, they weren't exactly aligned in terms of the way they were announced, but effectively both companies said, we're going to work together. And so strategically speaking, this to me is an indicator of just how big the onshoring opportunity for chip manufacturing is going to be. We all know TSMC is a huge winner. They're building more fabs here, but as the semiconductor industry and our federal government infrastructure spending looks to put $50+ billion to use, Intel has these shovel-ready projects to build new fabs here stateside. We're hearing more and more about further fab development here in the U.S. They're not going to back the building of these fabs and not make sure these fabs are pumping out volume. And so as I see it, the strategic relationship is going to be even tightened and more relevant based upon the fact that when those fabs here in the United States are done, the expectation, given the tax breaks that I expect to be given, will be that those are pumping out leading edge nodes, and that companies like Qualcomm and NVIDIA and AMD, but especially in this case, because of the lack of overlap, that Qualcomm will likely be one of those first companies that Intel will be producing some serious volume for, assuming they can meet pricing, demand, technology, and process requirements, Pat. But that's what I think is happening here. I think it's a little bit early, but in the next few years, Qualcomm is going to become really big for Intel.
Oh, how times change so quickly. What was it? 5 years ago, you had Intel, Apple, and Samsung complaining to the regulatory 5 different regulatory commissions about Qualcomm's so-called anti-competitive behavior on 4G, right? To lock in stuff for 5G. Okay. And here we are. We've got the whole balkanization, or, China and plus friends, and Western countries and friends. And we find ourselves in a freaking, I call it semiconductor pandemic here, right? We can't get enough semiconductors, and I would posit the most sophisticated silicon primarily being made in South Korea, cannon shot of North Korea, and Taiwan, who's threatening to invade China, who's threatening to invade Taiwan. So, and when Obama was president, he kind of forgot about the whole global foundries, right? Global foundries needed $2 to $3 billion to get 7 nanometer up and running on EUV, and nobody would give it to them. So they just got out of that. They just got out of that bleeding edge technology. So here we are, and now Intel sold its modem capabilities to Apple. Okay. And here we are. You have Intel IFS that I guarantee you, as soon as IFS is up, you will see Qualcomm making some of its modems here in the United States. That could be at IFS. That could be at Samsung's looking at a new facility, and TSMC is building a new facility in Arizona. Now, my odds are, I think it's going to be Intel. Qualcomm was talked about as a partner at Intel, and that very quickly got pulled off the slide, but they were on the slide. And I believe that Qualcomm will be fabbing modems at Intel IFS, or it could be a packaging deal, a 3D packaging deal similar to what Amazon announced with them. But, times have changed. 5 years going from court systems and suing and wanting to kill each other to likely potential partners. Now, they're going to compete like hell on 2 fronts, I believe. When the Nuvia team kicks in next year, we'll see samples soon. So my guess is we'll see the products in 2023 actually on shelf. They're going to be fierce competitors, and I think potentially the second accelerator that they have for machine learning inference, they're also going to be competitors on that. And the farther that Qualcomm gets into carrier infrastructure as well, that's exactly where Intel wants to go. Anyways, great speculation on a story that you participated. That was fun.
Yeah, that is a lot of fun, Pat. And not to really do much of a circle back here, but I'll stick to my guns that you have a growing TAM. Intel has recognition that they are patching a lot of gaps. However, there is competitive inroads that have been made, whether that's AMD or ARM, and that the market share will likely always be challenging to keep at the levels. And to some extent, Intel needs to diversify, and much like how AWS and these hyperscale cloud, like Microsoft is everybody's friend and everyone's competitor, and they've done it extremely well. And why can't Intel use its capabilities to have a similar type of relationship in certain parts of the market? So I look at this as a strategic move, as a smart move. I think it will take a little time, like you said, for it to all pan out. So, all right, everybody, that's it. That is it. I just went hard on a left turn there. I jerked the wheel, and it was sounding like I was going to keep talking. Nope, that's it. That's the show. We're at the top of the hour. Mr. Moorhead, another great week. Episode 102. We covered NVIDIA, Luminar, AMD, Cloudera, Mitel, RingCentral, Windows, Intel, Moor, Qualcomm. Great show, Pat. Everyone out there, hit that subscribe button. Join us. Send all that good feedback my way, that negative feedback. If you don't like what you heard, at Patrick Moorhead. It's easy. Find him on Forbes, find him on LinkedIn, find him on Twitter, but let him know if you don't like something. The good stuff always comes to me. For the show, though, that's it. We're going to see you again in a week or so. Got to say goodbye.
Have a good one. And I just want to remind everybody that this show is for informational and educational purposes only. We did talk about some public companies out there, but do not take this as a
I did that already, right?
You did that? Okay.
I
must have been drinking that 17th cup of coffee. Anyways, complaints, like Daniel said, complaints his way, accolades my way. Have a great weekend. We love